Hello, and welcome to my video stream discussing Hoi4 division templates. As you can see, I am currently in the middle of a game as Russia attacking Germany. The purpose of this video is not to talk about the best way to play Russia. The purpose of this video is to discuss different templates and how those templates can compare against each other against a similar enemy. This video is inspired by Taureor's recent video about combat width. I recommend that you check it out. It's a great video. It compares 10 width, 20 width, and 40 width, mostly infantry with support artillery templates. When I watched that video, it occurred to me that I have constructed a spreadsheet that I've spent probably dozens, maybe more than 100 hours working on to analyze different templates so that I can suck less at this game. In doing so, there's one thing that I noticed about Taureor's setup that is different than what I would do. But first, I want to point out the scenario that I'm using is very similar to the one that Taureor used in his video. I'm playing as Russia. I'm attacking Germany. I have defeated Poland, Romania, and Turkey before starting war with the German Reich. As you'll notice, war is already ongoing. I've already taken Königsberg and this other area, this area up here in the north, the exclave of Germany over there. And I have already taken Bulgaria. That is because I had to wait. I started the war so that Germany wouldn't completely crush this whole Western front and conquer everything and then move all of their troops up here. I need their troops on this border so that they don't successfully conquer all of this, so that they don't become incredibly powerful. The first couple times I played this through, I made that mistake. I let Germany conquer all of that, and it took me till 1942, 1944 to finish the fight against Germany. Look, maybe that's because I'm not the best Hoi4 player. I don't know. You can judge me however you want. The purpose isn't to show off. The purpose is to compare these templates, and playing for that long wasn't helping me do that. So I started the war as soon as they declared war on the Netherlands or Belgium. I forget which one they declared war on first. That way they have troops on my border and they'll stay small. Why am I waiting? Why do I have troops just sitting here on the border? Let me tell you why. This is why. Because I want rocket artillery. This is the big difference. The template that Taureor used in his video was a 5 infantry with support artillery, but no rockets. Look at that difference. More than 20 extra soft attack from the rocket support. Not bad. So I wanted to test that and see how much better that made it as compared to his analysis, because my suspicion is that, or was, that having both rocket and artillery as support on a 10 width infantry makes it a lot better. And why is that? Because you can put 10 of these guys on the front line, have them all attacking at once, or I'm sorry, 8 attacking at once into an 80 width. If it's a larger width, you can have even more. And that's a lot of artillery and rocket artillery that can be supporting your troops as they're attacking. But in order to do that, I had to research rocket artillery, which took until basically now. I basically just finished researching it in January 1st of 1940, and I rushed it the entire time. So the one thing I will definitely say is the advantage of what Taureor did is you can get his 40 width, because it only relies on artillery and not rocket artillery. His 40 width is going to be able to start this war a lot earlier and fight it a lot earlier, because having to wait for rocket artillery to really make your 10 width infantry, or in my case cavalry, I like the extra speed, in order to really make your 10 width work, really slows you down. So that's the one thing that I noticed about the difference there as I was playing through these scenarios. So this is my first template, and I want to show you how it does. So let's do that. Go. The first thing you'll notice is that it thinks I'm winning in a lot of places, but give it a second and you'll start to see some of those turn red. I have 21 divisions in this fight, each with 87. Oh, I actually won that one. That's great. Let's look at this one here. Maybe I should pause. I have 8 divisions in this fight, each with 70 attack power, which is not bad. That's a little less than 700, which is less than the attack power that they have. Which is why I'm losing, of course. Red. The one thing that you'll notice is that each of these guys has 44 organization. So this is the real power of the 10 width. The organization of a 10 width infantry or cavalry group is not that different than of a 20 or 40 width. And I'll show you examples of that later when I'm looking at the 20 or 40 width. But I have a lot more of them. So I have a ton of organization in this and a decent amount of attack power. I'll talk a little bit about how that works to the advantage and disadvantage later. But basically what this means is that these guys, they're really doing pretty good here. I'm winning a lot of these fights. I'm losing a lot of these fights. But the one thing that happens is because I have a lot of organization compared to the amount of hit points I have, I'm staying in the fight longer. Like this fight that I was looking at, it's still going. They're still going. And they'll be going for a while, especially because new guys will be able to join the fight and join the fight and join the fight. And what's going to happen is I'll be able to keep attacking continuously for a long time. And the fight will last for a long time because of the high levels of organization and because of the ability for guys in the back to recover and then jump back in the fight again. So there's a tremendous ability to push with this template. I don't actually care about that. But because it's high organization, relative to the amount of hit points, and because I'm staying in the fight for a long time, I'm going to be taking a lot of hit point damage. And we will come back to that. But I want to introduce you to some of the other contenders that I have set up here. And as I do, I want to, as full disclosure, say that I am using the console. I'm using the console for a specific reason. I wanted to use the console because, one, I don't want to take the time to run through from 1936 all the way to 1940 for 4 different run-throughs and all the different iterations of those run-throughs that I would need to do in order to not have something stupid happen, like Romania joined the Allies, which happened quite a few times. It was really annoying as I was setting up these scenarios. So what I did is I got the scenario up to a certain point, and I used the console to give myself the appropriate amount of equipment to make that template work. And to have it be proportional to the cost of the template that I'm creating. And I'll give you an example of that. I'll show you that with the next one. So this template costs about 500 to 700. to create. So what I did is for the next template that I want to show you, this is basically the template that Taureor was using. It's a 40 width template with support artillery. Now, I did include rocket artillery in this because I wanted it to be more even with the template that I was using. But if you'll notice, before I had 2 full sets of 5 stacks of 24. I only have 1 stack of 524 plus some support divisions over here. And the reason for that is that this 40 width template is about twice as expensive. So that's what I did. I used the console to give myself the equipment necessary, and only the equipment necessary, to stock an army with the same, that costs the same amount of production as the initial army that I built. Again, the purpose here is to test how these templates compare on a per production basis, not necessarily to show, you know, how good I am at playing Russia against Germany, or to demonstrate the optimal strategy for attacking Germany as Russia. And in order to do that, I wanted to make sure the scenario was as consistent as possible, which of course is not, you know, it's not always, it doesn't always work out that way, because sometimes, you know, France does something stupid, like decide, I don't need to send troops to my southern border to protect myself from Italy. I'll just let them march straight to Paris and take it. That's what happened in this scenario. So this is not exactly the same as the previous scenario. Not exactly, but what you will notice is that the amount of troops on the border is pretty similar. So again, let's compare this to the previous template that we were looking at. The previous template we were looking at was 10 width. It was exactly the same over here, right? But it was 10 width, and I like to use cavalry. It's not that much more expensive. For that 10 width template, I like to use the cavalry because it's not that much more expensive, but it gives you a little bit of speed, which can be useful in doing encirclements and can be useful in your troops doing all that stupid reorganizing that they do. And it can be useful for a lot of things, for overruns, occasionally. But for this, I didn't use cavalry. It still worked out to be about twice the cost. So this is the template I'm using here. And I want to show you what happens when I kick things off. Very similar. I'm having a lot of success early on. As you can see, I don't have nearly as many troops on the front line. Here I have 3 divisions filling 120 width, which is the full 120 width. But their attack power is twice as much, which is good. What you'll notice is a little bit more organization, but the sum total of organization that I had when I had 10 width was much, much higher. Also, though, because this is a particularly cheap template, it uses a lot of infantry, I've got tons of reserves that can jump in whenever this is running out of whenever one of these guys comes out of the fight, someone else will be able to jump in. So that's great. That means that I can continue pushing pretty hard with this template as well. Now, as I go through and look at these templates, I'm going to show you each of them at the start of the fight and kind of look at how well they're doing in the initial stages. And I am going to show you how long it takes for each of them to win, but I want to introduce you to each of the templates first. And at the end, I'm going to show you my spreadsheet and talk a little bit about how I analyzed the different templates. So that's my second template, 40 width with support. Now, here's the third template, which is the surprise. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say about this start here, you'll notice that the first time through, I started in January. And this time through, I started in November. And the reason I started 2 months early is because frickin' France didn't protect themselves properly like a bunch of idiots. and got taken over by Italy. And I was like, okay, I need to start this fight now. Otherwise, Germany's going to take Netherlands and Belgium, and I'm going to be facing the full brunt of the German war machine. And that is not going to be a fair test for this template. As it is a pretty decently fair test. It's about the same amount of troops on the border as I had previously, so that's good. This might be a little bit harder, but it's not substantially harder because I started the fight a couple months early. So from here on out, I started all of the wars in November instead of January. So only that first 10 width template is the one that starts in January. So let's take a look at our third template. This is the most surprising template. Initially, I wasn't planning on using this template, but I thought I would throw it in because it wasn't taking that long to make the different templates and set up the scenarios, especially with the saving and loading using the console to get the equipment set up. So this is a very, very different set of equipment. This is my 10 width tank template. And what you will notice right away is I only have 2 stacks of 24. This is my entire army. Why? Because these things are expensive. These things are almost 5 times as expensive as, actually they're a little bit more than 5 times as expensive as that initial 10 width template. So as I said, I used the console to give myself the equipment. I deleted a bunch of the spare equipment, so I don't have a lot of spare equipment lying around. It's about the same amount of production, and about the same amount of production will give you, I actually should have been a little bit less than this. It should have been a little bit less than this. But about the same amount of production will give you only 2 stacks of 24 as compared to 10 stacks of 24 divisions. That's a pretty significant difference. But this template has a hardness of 78 and an armor of 46. And while it's expensive, it's not that expensive. And the other thing that I really like about this template is the research. In order to build this template, you just need this, 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 and this. You need 4 tank techs, and you need 1-2 mobile infantry techs. That's it. And moving forward, 1, 2, maybe 3, if you want to go modern, techs needed to continue upgrading this template. 1, 2 techs needed to continue upgrading this template. Whereas if you're upgrading artillery, it's 9 techs, at least 6 techs. So I like that the amount of tech needed to make this work is relatively low. Like, relatively speaking, the infantry techs aren't going to be as important for this tech. You could skip them. You could spend more time researching air. You could spend more time researching navy if you wanted to with this template. So that's one thing that I really like about this template. And this is the second thing that I really like about this template. It is surprisingly effective. Now, what you'll notice is that initially it thinks I'm losing quite a few of these fights, but some of the ones that were red are slowly turning green. Why? Because they're not actually able to damage me that much. I have 78 hardness, which means that this 124 is only doing a quarter of that. And this is a tiny number. So relatively speaking, they're not doing that much damage to me. And I am able to just push really hard into the enemy. Not only that, but these troops are fast, which means they're able to push and push and push and continue the attack, giving the enemy minimal time to recover. So initially this looks maybe as good as the 10 width, but as it continues pushing, it's going to be pushing harder and harder and harder against the enemy, which is great. You'll see the results of that later on when I show you the later saves that I made. Now, huge disadvantage here. Let's look at my trade. No, I don't actually want to look at that. I'm going to pause. I'm running out of fuel pretty quick. I need to import probably about, I think when I did it, I need about 80 fuel. So I need to use about 10 civilian factories to get close to breaking even. It uses a lot of fuel. Not only does it use a lot of fuel, but it uses a lot of tungsten and rubber, which are relatively rare resources. We're not talking about steel here, you know. Also, if you get to the modern age, it's going to use a ton of chromium, which is also very rare, or modern tanks. So it's interesting because the resources needed for this are a lot greater, and you'd almost want to invest more in civilian industry than in military industry for this template. Okay, so give it another couple seconds to, you can kind of see how they're pushing. Like, look right here. They're going to push through and immediately start attacking. And because they're moving so quickly, they're able to press as they attack, which is, you know, that's the advantage of tanks, right? That's blitzkrieg. So let's go to the last one that I made. The last template that I wanted to compare. This template is, you'll see it in a second, it is also a 40 width, but it is a different strategy with 40 width. This strategy uses self-propelled medium artillery. Medium self-propelled artillery. And the idea here is to create highly effective 40 width units. What you'll notice, about as expensive, maybe even a little more expensive than the 10 width tank division, but it is 40 width, and there are a lot of advantages to that. Excuse me, there are a lot of advantages to being 40 width that I'll talk about more later. I'm also using a ton of support stuff just because I wanted to see how they work. One video that I think would be interesting to make would be to take this template, this exact scenario, and see how quickly Germany can be defeated if I remove logistics, if I remove signal company, if I remove field hospital, if I remove engineer company, to see what kind of effect each of those has, or maybe if I upgrade the recon or remove it. That would be interesting. I didn't do that in this run through, but I think that would be cool. Now, what I want you to notice with this one is that soft attack, 348 soft attack, because I have 5 medium self-propelled artillery here, bringing a ton of firepower to this template. But again, because they're so ridiculously expensive, and I think honestly this is too much. I didn't calculate, I guess, the production cost quite as effectively as I should have. Wait, is that correct? It was 500 to 700 the first time. Right, which is not 5 times. So this is a little bit too much. I should have left less of these. This is going to be pretending to be more effective than it is, but not by a huge amount, I don't think. So let's see it in action. Again, we're winning. The one thing that's really good about these 40 width templates is they're so much better on the defense. If you look at this template, the amount of defense it brings, 441, because of all of that infantry, you basically are going to have full defense. Whereas the tanks, you have to press with them because their defense is not great. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But these templates can be good for both defense and attack. The problem is this particular template is so expensive compared to just going infantry and support artillery. So as you notice here, we're kind of doing okay, but it's not pushing nearly as hard as the tanks were. And it's not pushing nearly as hard as, well, it's not that it's actually pushing. If you notice, I'm making a lot of ground here. You're seeing a lot of red, but I've made a lot of ground already. If you compare that to the 40 width with support artillery that I was using earlier, I had a lot of green, but I wasn't making as much ground. And that's because I had so many more troops that it was saying, okay, well, you've got reserves. You've got piles and piles of reserves that can jump in at any time. So you're going to win this fight. But because I didn't have massive amounts of artillery backing it up, those fights were taking a lot longer. What you'll notice is happening here is that number, you know, this 74 here, is changing pretty quickly. If I'm winning the fight, I'm winning the fight pretty quickly. Which is also something that happens with the 10 width, because, oh no, I'm sorry, that's not correct. Not with the 10 width. That's something that happens here because the amount of firepower they have relative to their organization. I mean, only 43 organization. That's the same amount of organization as a single 10 width, and I've only got 3 of them. So these fights are going to be relatively short. But they're still effective. I mean, look how much I'm pushing. I've made it this far already, and it's been a month. So that brings us to the next part of the analysis. I want to show you where all of these were in March of 1940 to kind of compare them. So here we go. So the first one, this is the 10 width with support artillery and rocket artillery. And this is where it was in March of 1940. We are up to, we've taken Berlin, we've taken most of Hungary, and Germany is, I do have 100% collaboration to make the fight not last forever. Germany is very close to capitulation. This isn't going to be much longer. So this is 3 months later. Now remember that all of my other templates started in November. I didn't start this fight until January. So we are pushing really effectively with these units. If you want to see them in action, mostly at this point, I am... am I? Yeah, no, I'm good. Okay. I was wondering if at this point, the one thing that I noticed as I was playing with this is, with this particular template, is that I had to pause periodically to let my stocks recuperate because I'm losing a lot of gear. And again, that comes back to having the tons of organization compared to my hit points. I'm staying in the fight longer. I'm dealing out more damage, but I'm also taking more damage throughout that time. I'm taking more hit point damage relative to organization damage because I have less hit points than organization, which means I'm losing equipment a lot faster. I'm losing manpower a lot faster than my other templates. And we'll see that at the end when we look at the amount of manpower that the war cost for each of the different templates. But I am continuing to push. We're still going. I'm basically on... I don't care. I am on careful. I can bump it up. I don't want to because there's the Czechoslovakian forts around here that I don't want to be like banging my head against and dying. So careful is actually pretty good for this situation here. But they're still making progress. And for most of these, I pretty much stayed on careful the entire time. So let me take a look at the next one. So this is the 40 width with support artillery. And again, I had an extra 2 months to get to this point with this one. And the great thing about this one, and I do really like this template. I didn't expect to like this template as much because of the analysis that I'd done on it. But the thing that I do like about it is that I have a good balance of the number of divisions that I have available as compared to how effective they are. But look at this. This is I started 2 months earlier. I started in November. 1 or 2 along the front, which is the same as the other one. It's not like they're significantly larger numbers of German troops on the front. I just have not made that much progress. With 2 extra months of war, and I'm way back here. I haven't even taken Berlin yet. I don't have all of this. I haven't crushed Hungary. This is significantly less effective than the 10 width. And the difference is adding the rocket artillery. It makes a huge difference to make that 10 width more effective. So if you do want to play with a 10 width, until 1940, you're going to be less effective because you don't have that rocket artillery. But when you get to 1940 and you get that rocket artillery, that 10 width starts to become really competitive with the 40 width templates that you could use. And I personally really like it. And I'll talk about that more a little bit later. But let's take a look at the next one. Let's see where our tanks were in March. And this one's starts getting really interesting. I'll show you in just a second. So check it out. I mean, we're as far as we were with the 10 width. Now, remember, the 10 width infantry was started 2 months later. So this is with an extra 2 months. But the other thing that you'll notice is I am still pushing hard. Like, I've got a lot of green here. I'm continuing to push and push and push. Whereas my 10 width had kind of come to a standstill, sort of, at this point. So the other thing that I want to point out, look at the amount of manpower I've lost. Only 200. It was 600 with the 10 width. So that's that, that 10 width infantry. This has the same problem that it's 10 width, but we're also, I've only got 2 divisions. I'm using 38. Oh, that's the wrong side. I've only got 2 divisions here. I'm only using 20 of the 40 width that's available. I'm only using 20 of the 120 width that's available. So I'm not even like with the 10 width, I was stacking enough to completely fill the width. Here, I'm barely touching the amount of width that's available. It's the hardness and the armor that makes it so effective. So I don't have the same effect where I'm constantly running out of equipment. Like, I'm running out of tanks a little bit. Yeah, tanks are hard to build. They're expensive. But otherwise, like, a lot of my equipment, I'm not really running out of. These aren't as big numbers as the other one, if you remember. And I'm definitely not spending as much manpower. So, huge advantage here. And here's the disadvantage. I don't have enough troops. I can't patrol this border. Hungary broke through Czechoslovakia, and I cannot put troops on the border to stop them from charging into my land. We'll come back to this because it's not that big a problem for specific reasons, but I noticed that with this run through, with only 48 divisions, or not 48, 60 divisions, because I have these extra 12 over here. These ones are just over in that to deal with the border dispute with the Japanese. With only 60 divisions, I really can't push against Germany and take on Hungary at the same time. So this is potentially bad, but we'll come back to it because it's actually something that I can deal with. But let's take a look at my 40 width with self-propelled medium artillery. Oh, and the other thing that I really like about using the self-propelled medium artillery and anti-air is that they do give you a little bit of armor and hardness, which does make your troops a little bit more effective. But how much more effective? I mean, this is probably the worst situation. This is worse than the 40 width with support. And if you remember, it was a little bit more expensive. So maybe this template isn't as great as I would think it would be. Now, what I will point out is we're doing okay on equipment, and again, pretty good on manpower losses. So it's not doing bad. If I pause it and see if the maybe the Germans will attack me. Like, did you see that 90 show up and then disappear? Look at that. Look at this defense. The defense here is, let me zoom in on it for a second. The defense here is fantastic. I mean, the amount of firepower is ridiculous. And then the defense, 500, is ridiculous. So incredibly effective at holding a line. Very, very well. But they just don't quite have the pushing power of some of those other templates. They don't have the tanks with the breakthrough that the tanks have, or all of the hardness. They have a little bit of hardness. What is the hardness? It's only 20%, and the armor's only 23, which, if I were to guess, I'm guessing these guys have they only have a piercing of 12, so that armor is enough to actually be effective. But yeah, we're just not quite doing quite as well. So let's take a look at the final results. When do each of these end? So if we look at our 10 width, it was over. I beat Germany, at least. I didn't bother finishing through all of Italy. Once you beat Germany, Italy's not hard to mop up. But I defeated Germany with my 10 width in April 14th. Not bad. And remember, again, this was 2 months later start than all of the other run-throughs. Now, disadvantage, 694,000 manpower losses. This is the highest number of losses and the least number of kills of any of the trial runs. But the ability to get in there, dish out damage, stick in the fight is really good. And on top of that, give these guys parachutes, make these guys Marines, make these guys Mountaineers. It's very easy to adjust this into a specialized template for specialized situations and bring all of that firepower to bear in a specific context if you want to. I do think that if you're going to be doing naval invasions, you don't necessarily want to be using 10 width for naval invasions, just because there's a cap on how many divisions you can use in a naval invasion. And if you're using 10 width, then you probably want to send 8 divisions to get your maximum firepower if you're hitting a coast that's fortified. And you can't that's going to take up almost your entire cap of amphibious landings just to attack 1 point if you have a 10 cap, at least early in the game. Whereas if you have a 40 width, you can attack like 4 or 5 points because each 40 width, incredibly powerful amphibious landing division is only using up 1 division worth of your cap and bringing 40 width to do it versus only bringing 10 width to do it. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend using 10 width for amphibious landings. And for me, that's the biggest disadvantage of the 10 width strategy. Because amphibious landings are so important in this game. But let's take a look at some comparisons. So the 40 width infantry, mostly infantry with a little bit of support artillery strategy, basically what Taureor was using and what he found to be the best strategy, didn't finish beating Germany. And again, with a 2-month head start, didn't finish beating Germany until June. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought the 6 was the month. Until October. Not April, October. So it took a lot longer. And actually, way more manpower, which should not be surprising at all because I was mostly using manpower. I had a huge stack of infantry that I was throwing at the enemy and hoping to overwhelm them. So if you have manpower problems, this is the 40 with focusing on infantry is not going to be a good strategy because I used a ton of manpower. Now, I also spent a lot of their manpower, and that's part of, I think, what this came down to is grinding each other down. If I remember, I think Germany still had probably plenty of manpower left, but it was starting to get to the point where it was close to wearing them out on manpower front. But this was the slowest. And the reason for that is it just doesn't pack nearly as much of a punch. And it's amazing how much the difference, because I completely believe that Taureor's strategy of attacking earlier, because he was able to attack earlier because he wasn't waiting for rocket artillery, attacking earlier with a 40 width with support artillery is going to be more effective than attacking early with a 10 width with support artillery without the rocket artillery. But once you wait and bring in the rocket artillery, the 10 width is way more effective than the 40 width if you're going for support artillery. But let's compare that to some of the other results. So I have 2 different end situations for the tanks. The first is when I defeated Germany, and you'll see why it's the first of 2 I-won scenarios. That will become obvious pretty quickly because I had a problem that I had to deal with. Yeah, Hungary took a lot of territory. Now, I finished at around the same time as my 10 width, but again, remember, around the same time my 10 with an extra 2 months. But 1/3 of the men lost and killing more of the German manpower than otherwise. So there's pros and cons there of both of these. But the lack of ability to cover my entire border means that Hungary did this. Now, the good news is this is all recently conquered territory. All I have to do to cap Hungary is rush Budapest, basically, which is exactly what I did after defeating Germany, especially because the tanks move fast. It's not that big a deal. It was only another 9 days. So the auspicious date of April 20th, 1940 is when my tanks rolled through Hungary and capped Hungary, leaving just the cleanup of a few scraps of Hungary where Italian troops were, and Italy, which is already being eaten by France and Britain. So Still pretty good. So the tanks are really effective, really cutting down on manpower costs. My plenty of supplies. I'm not running out of equipment anytime soon because they're just not taking that much damage. So if I were to make a suggestion about 10 width, it would be go ahead and have those 10 width, because remember, the 10 width with support artillery and rocket artillery, I had 10 stacks of 24. Like, think, when you're Germany invading the Soviet Union and you start to get these long front lines, that massive, the ability of those units to spread out is fantastic. Whereas these tanks would be like, a tiny fraction of the arc of the border that you end up getting when you're attacking the Soviet Union, or if you're attacking the United States, or if you're in Africa, or if you're over in Asia. Just the size of the borders can be tremendous. So that is really where the 10 wide is extremely effective, is in those situations where you have very large borders. But you will burn through equipment and manpower faster than using tanks. However, it wouldn't hurt much if I put a rocket artillery on here. It would add an extra 20 soft attack, which is significant and would make tanks more effective. So combining having a few 10 width tank divisions along with 10 width cavalry or infantry divisions could be a really effective strategy, because I could have one stack of 24 tanks and 5 stacks of 24 infantry. And I would be able to both maintain a fairly long border and then also concentrate my 10 width tanks with all of that extra firepower that they would have on a single point to break through for strategic, encirclements and things like that. So that's not bad. Now the disadvantage there is then you have to research both tanks and artillery, which means, what I said about the advantage of this build, of the tank build, is that it doesn't require a lot of tech from the infantry and armor tech trees, which means you can invest more in naval or air. You lose that a little bit if you're also researching all of that artillery and stuff, but it is really, really effective. And then finally, it was July when my 40 with medium self-propelled artillery won. The one thing that I did differently with the medium self-propelled artillery is I spread them out over the entire border of Hungary and Germany. So I didn't have the same problem where Hungary broke through this. I did this run after the tank run. So I realized I'm going to need to stop, especially with this, because they don't move as fast. I'm not going to be able to blitz through to Hungary and take them out. And because it took longer, if I had not covered the entire border of Hungary and Germany with this run through, I bet Hungary would have been at Moscow by the time I finished off Germany, which was not great. So not as effective. The amount of manpower lost, not as great as the tanks, but not as bad as the 10 width. So it's sort of at a balance. But again, I just don't have that many troops. I think this is really good if you want to build a really, really good amphibious landing template. make these amphibious tanks, or use some amphibious tanks and some amphibious mech or marines, and this makes a really powerful amphibious landing, just because the tremendous amount of soft attack that you're going to bring. But it's not as cost effective. The number of divisions that I can get and how effective they are is not as good as either the 10 with support artillery or the 10 with tank without support artillery, which would be even better with support artillery. I mean, it would have been like an extra 20 soft attack, so an extra 20% better if I had used rocket artillery with the tanks. Again, more research, but so there you have it. I really, really like 10 width infantry with artillery and rocket artillery. And let me tell you also why, another reason that I really, really like this template. And that's because you can make it cavalry, and you can use it in Africa, in Australia. You can use it in all these low supply areas. It doesn't use any fuel. There is no fuel. This is as effective as a division that is tanks and mechanized infantry. It is as effective as that, just about. It won the war faster than that. More casualties, but faster. And it did it without using any fuel at all. You put a logistics company on this, and it does it with very low supply, incredibly low supply for the effectiveness of it. So you can use these in South America. You can use them in Australia. You can use them in attacking the Soviets. They can spread out to fill those long, giant borders that can happen in those low supply places. I really like it. The one thing, again, I have used them in South America in the 40s, which is a bad time to be attacking South America. And what ends up happening is, and this is something that I didn't discuss, but look at my experience levels. These guys, after fighting this entire war, gained no experience. No experience. Why? Because they're losing equipment so fast that the experience they gain on the front line is lost as fast or faster than they're winning. And if you're in somewhere like Brazil fighting in the jungle, where you're losing tons, where you're losing the fight as much as you're winning it, you're basically just draining experience with this. Whereas, and this is the real advantage of the 40 width, I think. And all right, I might be embarrassing myself right now if I load them up and they're all rookies, but I'm pretty sure that they're going to have much better experience at the end of the war, which means that they were kind of gathering steam as they were fighting, whereas the 10 width were doing really well. So they all started rookie. I didn't have any of these trained. Now they're trained after fighting that war. And if they continue fighting, they'll continue to go up. I didn't do any training prior to the war starting, so I was in general just throwing rookies into the fight. So these guys, particularly because they have the field hospital, and they have room for some of these support things because it's not full of artillery and rocket artillery. So the question is, how effective are these? And that is, again, something I'd like to ask and figure out. But yeah, they have gained experience a little bit. So they're getting more powerful over time, whereas the 10 width aren't. So that is the 4 different templates that I created and am comparing in these videos in these saves. And the conclusion that I come to is, 1, tanks are really good, but 2, that 10 width can actually be really good if you wait for rocket artillery. Now I want to show you. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it really interesting. I included a link to the spreadsheets that I use to analyze these templates in the description. Feel free to take a look at it and offer suggestions if you have any to improving it. Like, comment, subscribe. Definitely, most of all, comment. Let me know if there's any further analysis you would like me to do, any other specific videos or questions that you have, or if there's another game you'd like me to take a look at. I've played Prison Architect and City. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video, and I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, morning, whatever it is, wherever you are, whenever you are. Thank you, and